Travelers sometimes find objects that look like pieces of remarkably lifelike stone carvings of living creatures, with missing parts appearing to have been bitten off. Seasoned explorers regard such relics as warnings, knowing that the basilisk that created them is likely to be nearby.
Hey, I'm Sean, one half of the Printy Brothers, and this is our series where we 3D print and paint every monster in the Monster Manual. We're getting to some pretty iconic monsters now. Last episode, Anthony painted the Banshee. This episode, I will be tackling the Basilisk.
This Basilisk model here is from Dungeon Dog, a very talented 3D artist with a ton of great minis. Check him out in the link in the description below. Now take a look at how weirdly I primed this model. I initially sprayed it with what I thought was a gray primer, but the label was kind of ripped off, and it was green. So then I just primed the underside with white. It looks weird, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to base over it anyways. Alright, let's talk about the Basilisk. Like many D&D monsters, basilisks did not originate from D&D. The true origin of the Basilisk is unknown, but it is mentioned in many European bestiaries and legends. These accounts tell us that the Basilisk is the Serpent King that causes death to anyone who looks it in its eyes. Many believe that the cobra is what initially inspired the Basilisk because of the similarities between the two. A cobra can stand upright and can kill a victim from a distance, though the means of attack for a cobra is venom as opposed to just looking at something for the Basilisk. There are 3 different types of basilisks described in mythology: a giant snake, a giant lizard, and a reptilian rooster. That last type is usually called a cockatrice, which is actually a different D&D monster, and we'll get to that one a little bit later in this series. In D&D, the basilisk is depicted more as the second type, a giant lizard. So let's talk about the D&D version of a basilisk. Basilisks are large reptilian creatures with 8 legs. They are relatively slow, however, which is why they tend to rely on their petrifying gaze. If you look at a basilisk in the eyes, it can turn you to stone. Mechanically, this is pretty interesting. If a player starts their turn within 30 feet of the basilisk, they must succeed a con save or begin to turn to stone. The player then gets one chance to make another con save at the end of their next turn or be turned to stone permanently. Already, the basilisk is pretty interesting mechanically. When fighting it, players need to come up with an actual plan if they want to survive. Now, there are a few ways to counter the petrifying gaze. When a basilisk turns a person to stone, it will oftentimes eat the person while they are still stone. The stone then turns back into organic matter at some point in the digestive process of the basilisk. It is believed that some type of oil is produced inside the basilisk's gullet that returns petrified creatures to flesh again. So if a party member is turned to stone in a basilisk fight, the other party members could attempt to harvest oil from the basilisk to bring their friend back. A greater restoration spell also works. But if a player wants to avoid getting turned to stone altogether, they can choose to avert their gaze at the start of their turn, if they know about the petrifying gaze ability. Doing so means they don't have to make a con save to resist petrification, but they also can't see the basilisk, presumably when they would most need to in a life and death battle. So if you can't look at a monster directly while fighting it, how do you fight it? Well, if you're familiar with Greek mythology and Medusa, you probably know where I'm going with this. You look at it through a reflection. Medusa is, of course, another D&D monster with a petrifying gaze ability. And she also is a figure in Greek mythology where Perseus kills her while he is looking at her through the reflection of his shield. Players could do that, or even bring a mirror. A lot of cool possibilities that your players could come up with. Now, if a basilisk sees itself in a reflection, it mistakes itself for an enemy and will use its petrifying gaze on itself. This is by far the best way to combat a basilisk, and it's a really cool idea. The basilisk turning itself to stone is an epic climax to a combat encounter. This whole petrification ability really sets up the basilisk encounter as a puzzle to solve. Puzzles inside of encounters, in my opinion, always make for the best encounters. D&D is a lot more fun when you're not just attacking and doing the same exact thing every turn, and instead you're working out a solution in your head and working together as a team.
If you're enjoying this series so far and want to see us continue it, subscribe. We really appreciate it. We're almost to 2,000 subscribers.
So how would you use a Basilisk in your game? I think the Basilisk is a cool enough monster to have an entire session revolving around just it. The party could be tasked by a monster hunting guild to slay the beast known for killing its prey with just a gaze. Or you could just have the Basilisk be in the way of the party's greater objective. Either way, before a combat encounter ever breaks out, you should definitely set up the Basilisk. Have the party talk with NPCs who regale them with tales of travelers turning to pure stone. And as the party is tracking the Basilisk, or as they are on their way to whatever objective they have them encounter a group of stone adventurers much like themselves. The setup for a monster is just as important as the actual monster, in my opinion. By the time the party lays eyes on a creature that they're about to fight, they should have already begun to think about a possible plan for the encounter. As for my paint job for this model, I tend to think of the Basilisk as a darker creature, blacks and blues, but I really liked the art for it in the monster manual, so I mostly replicated that. I went for a mostly blue Basilisk with some red detailing on its spikes and fingernails. And that's really about it. And I think it turned out pretty good. So let's take a look at the final paint job. Let me know what you guys think of my paint job and the Basilisk as a whole in the comments below. Though it's a pretty simple paint job, I'm still happy with how it turned out. Next episode of this series, Anthony will be painting the Behir, and then I get the daunting task of painting probably the most iconic D&D monster of all time, the Beholder. So subscribe if you want to see that. We really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.